afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Houston. I am the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. That is a collaboration with the University of North Texas at Dallas, Dallas College, and the Urban Search Institute, as well as community organizations across the city of Dallas. And I would like to welcome you to our first part of a three-part series, a holistic DE&I approach. Today, we're going to have three subject matter experts in academia discuss the power, the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our space, in our realm. Now, I want to thank you all. This is our second year. And similar to last year, we are going to have a very open discussion where people will be vulnerable. We are in the spirit of creating and building knowledge so that we can not only live, work, and play together, but we can also provide solutions for the future, for our future generations. So in the next couple of hours, I want you all to please, if you have any questions, please ask them in our Q&A portion. But most importantly, I want you to be open. I want you to be able to receive information, and I want this to be a learning environment, as we are all here in the spirit of productivity and collaboration. Now, I am honored to introduce to you all the moderator of not only today's event, but throughout our series, Ms. Kimberly O'Neill. Ms. Kimberly O'Neill is an award-winning professor, executive leader, and social good expert. She was the youngest serving African-American woman city manager in the United States. And as a veteran senior government and nonprofit executive, Kimberly has used her voice to impact policy decisions while lobbying in New York City and on Capitol Hill. She now works within the social sector and leads Giving Blueprint, a consulting company with a mission to impact social change through the development of strategic partnerships and growth plans within the social sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you our moderator, Ms. Kimberly O'Neill.
Thank you, Matt. I'm so excited to be here today and to be back again for the second year of this DEI series. This is such an important time for us to continue these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in what we typically hear people say in the workplace, but what I'm really excited about this year is that we're going laser focused into different sectors within the workplace. So this year, we're kicking off this three-part series with a holistic DEI approach in academia. And as a professor on both the community, formerly on the community college level and on the grad level, I think it's one of the more important things that we do talk about from K through 12 all the way through post-secondary education. And so today we have three amazing people that we're going to hear dialogue from, get presentations, and then go into a structured Q&A session. So one of the things that I want to make sure that's happening this year, as we have in the past, utilize the Q&A. For those of you that are watching, utilize the Q&A function in Zoom and post your questions as they're coming to you. It will allow me to pull those questions and when we go into the Q&A sections with our panelists, so we can have a structured and robust conversation about that. But before we get started, I want to make sure that we kind of touch base with some of our partners for today. So our first partner that I'd like to introduce for us is Dr. Justin Lonin, to be able to present some words for us and just kind of to help to curate the partnership and his interest in supporting this work.
Well, thank you, Professor O'Neill, and thank you, Matt, and thanks to the entire team for putting this on. It's a pleasure to be here with you again to build on the foundation and the conversation from last year as you all were focusing on this work, and we as institutions are working within our community, and so it's just an honor to join and get us kicked off today. You know, this is a topic that's not new to academic institutions, but it certainly has renewed focus from both good and bad. A lot of attention and work that has needed to come, and for all of us to really dive into this work. And then also just in the public sphere, public square, there's an additional conversation that is going on. So it's really important that we're engaging in this conversation today. And let me just tell you a quick minute about the work that we're doing at Dallas College to build on some of these topics. We are an institution that has been in transition, moving from the consolidation of the Dallas County Community College District to Dallas College to build on that 54-year legacy, to really build this new institution with new focus, to be better able to serve our students and our community. And as it relates to DEI, that consolidation, that transition has uncovered new areas of concern that we had not given attention to. And so we've been very intentional in that work. And so in 2018, 2019, really led by our then board chair, Deanna Flores, and our now current board chair, Monica Litter Bravo, we began to peel those layers back and dig a little deeper. And so did a few things to really lay the foundation for the work that we're doing now. And we started by bringing in an outside group to really take a look under the hood, see where our issues and challenges were. And out of that, we did some things in engaging with our employees. We did a survey of employees around DEI, so we could really hear what was on their hearts and minds, and where as an institution that we needed to be focusing. And that has really informed much of what we have done since. And also, our board, again, under their leadership, created a new board committee focused on diversity, equity, inclusion. So at the governing board level, we are having regular ongoing focus and attention, and then it's part of our overall strategic focus as an institution. And then additionally, we created the Office of Social Responsibility in 2020. This office combines the work of our supplier diversity team, of our sustainability team, and created a new Office of DEI. Led by Dr. Jasmine Parker, who's here with us today. And we're really glad and honored to have her a part of this team. But this foundation that I described really has provided us the pathway on this journey. I think Dallas College, like many of our institutions, are on a journey together. And so I used the word intentional earlier. Intentionality matters. And I know that that's something that'll come up today. And so we are engaging in conversations where we can internally, providing safe space, having honest, direct conversations, working with our employee resource groups to make sure that we're focusing on relevant issues and topics. And then also, obviously, expanding what we're doing in the way of our training and our understanding together, and then our student focus. We serve a diverse population at Dallas College, and want to ensure that we're getting the voice of our students in these conversations as well. So really excited about the path that we are on as an institution here at Dallas College, and how that mirrors so much, I think, of the conversation that we'll hear today with this amazing team of experts. So it's an honor to be with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And then we're going to move on to our second partner, and that would be Danetta Bland. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Neill. So on behalf of Vice Chancellor Williams and the University of North Texas System Administration, I am excited to be a part of this series. Holistic DE&I is so important, not only in academia, but as well as in government and business. So I'm thrilled to join as a participant and a partner in the series today. The University of North Texas System has also been on a journey similar to what Dr. Blunden described with Dallas College. Our journey is a bit different, especially at System, as I have the pleasure of becoming the first inaugural Chief Diversity Officer and Vice Chancellor for the system. In creating this role, our board wanted intentionality in ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion was held at the highest levels of priority for our institutions, which include the University of North Texas, Denton, University of North Texas, of course, at Frisco, the University of North Texas Health Science Center, and the University of North Texas at Dallas. In coming in these first 6 months, I'll tell you, I've been overwhelmed by the response from our community, from our students, staff, faculty, in terms of the excitement on going on this journey and being more intentional and direct around what we're trying to accomplish as one of the state's largest institutions. We have started off by taking it to the next level. Similar to the story we heard, it's really important that we understood what our current state was. Really get under the hood, as Dr. Lennon referenced earlier, to determine where our gaps are, where our opportunities are to enhance, but also celebrate our successes on the items that we are doing well in. As many of you know, the University of North Texas systems have several institutions that are minority serving institutions. So how do we move the needle from being Hispanic enrolling to Hispanic serving with intentionality? How do we recruit and retain diverse faculty and staff? How do we ensure that our students feel a place of belonging on their campus? In terms of our education, I like to tell this quick story in terms of we've done a fantastic job in terms of training. Our training has been top notch across some of our institutions, but there's always work levels to grow. And so experiential learning is the new direction in which we're moving. And so what does that mean for us? It means it's not just, learning about microaggressions, but actually putting our employees, faculty, and students in positions where they can practice, where they can actually be uncomfortable and talk about in a safe space how to move the needle on this. We're really focused on transparency and authenticity and ensuring that our values are transparent. Lastly, I think it's really important, and I'm sure we're going to hear this more and more today from our fantastic panelists, to talk about the importance of preparing our next generation. Progressive measures in terms of ensuring that our faculty, at some of our campuses have required DE&I learning, progressive measures at looking at taking college courses that are based on cultural humility and education and being able to get college credit for it, et cetera. So I am delighted and excited to be a part of this coalition. And thank you all for welcoming me in my first North Texas event. It has been quite fun getting used to the environment, meeting new people, and I'm appreciative of the time. So thank you, Dr. O'Neill.
Thank you so much. And before we get started and I introduce our first panelist, I just want to kind of set the tone a little differently. When I mentioned earlier about DEI and how we often talk about it in the workplace, we sometimes forget that we also need to talk about it in the educational system. And in order for DE&I to work and for us to enhance our opportunities, we have to start at the very beginning. And so there is a different level of importance on the conversation that we're having today, the conversation that will end the conversation from a K through 12 perspective, but we're also going to start it off from a higher education perspective. And I just want us to have that context as we begin to listen to these presentations and then go into our Q&A session later today. I want to start off by introducing our first panelist. Our first panelist is Blue Wooldridge. He is a professor emeritus of public administration and policy at Virginia Commonwealth University. In addition to his status, he was recently recognized with an honorary designation in the inaugural cohort of VCU's Distinguished Career Professors. This appointment was made in recognition of his outstanding contribution to the VCU community and in the public administration program and the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Previously, he served as a professor and a member of the graduate faculty for the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs, Virginia Commonwealth University. Other previous professional experiences include affiliate faculty for the Department of African American Studies at VCU, extension professor at the Institute of Public Service International, the University of Connecticut, Director of the Graduate Program in Urban Affairs in Northern Virginia, Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, Virginia Tech, the Director of the Urban Management Curriculum Development Project and Training Associate with the National Training and Development Service. He was the Assistant Professor on the tenure track and interim chair of the Graduate Program in Urban Affairs at Virginia Tech, Coordinator of Federal Programs and Budget Analyst for the United States Virgin Islands, and a Peace Corps volunteer in the Senior Science Master in Secondary Schools in Northern Nigeria. I also want to add that Dr. Wooldridge holds a BA degree in physics from Berea College, a master's in governmental administration from the Wharton Graduate Division of the University of Pennsylvania, and the Master of Public Administration and the Doctor of Public Administration degrees from the University of Southern California. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Dr. Wooldridge for his presentation, and be sure to take notes. And again, post your questions in the Q&A form so we can engage after the presentations later today. Dr. Wooldridge, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Professor O'Neill. I'm delighted to be here, and my wife is delighted that you gave me a reason that I had to shave and put on a shirt and tie today. It's been a long time since I'm not teaching this semester. I started out as a professor from my Virgin Island experience, working in the budget office as a professor of public finance. But I've been a professor now for about 45 years. And so you become an old professor, you get into teaching a variety of things. So I do teach policy analysis and human resource management. Having a very diverse background myself, I got into teaching a course in workforce diversity. I've always been interested in the concept of social equity. And as you'll see in my presentation, only about 4 or 5 years ago did I get involved in conducting research and examining the benefits of the concept of inclusion. So I've covered, or I'm involved in all 3 aspects of the DEI rubric. I got interested in this particular topic, the benefits of a diverse faculty, because in my 30-some years at Virginia Commonwealth University, I served as president of the Black Education Association 4 or 5 times. It wasn't a very competitive position, so nobody was racing to become president. But it did mean that any time that there was a renewed interest because the students revolted or something at my university, I got appointed to every diversity committee at the university. I also had the feeling that I needed to identify what are the benefits of a diverse faculty, because being on many search committees, and I assume many of you have had this responsibility, you discover that there is sometimes active pushback on doing something extraordinary in order to promote faculty diversity. And if not active, you get passive pushback. So I decided that I needed to come up with some reasons for why of the benefits of a diverse faculty. And also through my educational association in public administration, NASPA, I've served as chair or co-chair of the Equity and Diversity Committee. And so a little bit of this presentation is something that I give every year at our annual conference. Now, I don't normally get political, but I am going to be putting in a plug because this section of my presentation was prepared with one of my former MPA students, Ms. Jessica Mason. And I think it's true that she's in the Dallas area running in a primary to be a member of Congress. So she's a great person. If you happen to be in the district that she is running in, give her your consideration. Well, I teach courses in workforce diversity, and we advocate for diversity in organizations for at least these three reasons. It has been suggested that a diverse workforce enhances organizational performance. There was a concept that was developed in England during World War II, I might add while I was living there, called representative bureaucracy, that indicates that the profile, the demographic profile of the service providers ought to be reflective of the service recipients. And a concept that I picked up through my social psychology friends, the concept of Bandura's vicarious self-efficacy. Again, I'm going to ask Mr. Houston, by the way, to send out a copy of my presentation to all the participants in case you do happen to be interested in it. Some minority groups are more effective, innovative, creative, and produces higher quality solutions than their homogeneous counterparts. When diversity is managed properly, we'll see that it's not just numbers, but it's also how well the numbers are managed, how well diversity is being implemented, and also the degree of a new term to me, inclusion. It has been suggested, and there's some research, which I have copies of, developing a diverse faculty enhances appropriate teaching that will lead to learning outcomes for all students, not only underrepresented minorities. In terms of some in terms of some research, a study that was done on behalf of the PhD project, which I'll come back to later on, that diversity in front of the classroom enhances the educational experience for all. And you'll see some of the statistics here that talks about a positive impact of both minority and non-minority students to having a diverse faculty. There's some research that has indicated that minority faculty are more creative, innovative than their counterparts, and developing a diverse faculty will enhance teaching and student learning outcomes. Minority faculty, and I certainly hope this, and we try to promote it through our Black Educational Association at BCU, are more willing to represent the educational interests of minority students in the classroom. Again, you see some more research. Minority faculty and women faculty are more likely to include readings on racial, ethnic, gender, women issues in most courses, while white male faculties are less likely to do so. Women and faculty of color are more likely to use active learning techniques and to include the perspective of women and racial and ethnic minorities in the curriculum. Then there's the concept of vicarious self-efficacy. Albert Bandura's concept of social learning theory. And he looked at how do people develop the concept of self-efficacy in a topic. And he had four ways in which people develop a feeling of self-efficacy. One of them is doing it. You ride a bicycle and you become convinced that you can ride a bicycle. But almost equally important for people to develop confidence that they have self-efficacy is seeing someone that looks like them do it. That's vicarious self-efficacy. One has the capacity for producing desired results based on observations of what other similar people do and the resulting consequences. Researchers in education have established that who teachers influence the performance of students. And I mentioned I was coming back to the PhD project, which is a national endeavor in management education, usually in the business school. It started about 25 years ago when Bernie Molino was concerned about not having a sufficient number of underrepresented minorities studying finance and accounting. He was with Peace Marwick and Mitchell at the time. And whether he had heard about vicarious self-efficacy or not, he said, I know what we do. If we want to get more students in our accounting and financial management classes, we have to get more professors that look like them in the front of the room. And he started something called the PhD project. I'm delighted to say that I've kind of introduced the PhD project, which I've been following for about 25 years. And I urge you to take a look at your own institutions to see if the management faculty has a chapter of the PhD project, because they're doing some wonderful things in increasing the number of diverse faculty in management education. Minority faculty are important because they serve as role models, encouraging minority students to achieve a higher academic performance. Again, might be of interest, particularly because of the Hispanic serving nature of some of our host organizations. The levels of representation of Latino faculty has effect on Latino students' academic outcomes. Latina faculty increases the availability of role models. Researchers further admitted that the availability of and contact with Latina faculty was an important, significant factor to student academic success. And I have all of these references. The bottom line, diversity in faculty enhances teaching and student learning outcomes. A diverse faculty will utilize teaching practices that benefits the diverse educational interests of underrepresented minority students. And a diverse faculty benefits students in that it allows positive role modeling relationships to be built, which is integral to the success and academic outcomes of minority student population. Now, one of the things that I used to do as president of the Black Education Association at VCU is to monitor the progress or lack of it of minority faculty, but particularly Black. At VCU, we're mainly talking about Black African-American faculty in terms of underrepresented minorities. And so over the years, I developed, and I would take the provost's report on the status of faculty and then analyze it from the perspective of the status of Black faculty. I would analyze this data horizontally, the yearly status of existing underrepresented minority faculty and percent changes, both the number and the percent distribution by rank, category. We had both teaching and research and academic and professional, tenure status, position permanency, and whether these faculty were full and part-time. One of the things I tried to do based upon institutional organizational representation, I compared the ratio of the students to that of faculty of the same, I used the term identity group to talk about different demographic groups. One year, I think this was like about 2012, the ratio range for the ratio of white male students to white male faculty was 11:1. From female students to female faculty, 22:1, and African-American faculty, which we had like about 5,000 out of our 30-some thousand students, to African-American faculty, which we had at that year, 101, was 53:1. And then I would compare the ratio of the entire student body to about 32,000 to each group of underrepresented minorities. And for that particular year, the ratio of all of our students the Black full-time faculty was approximately 318 or 317 to 1. So obviously, it would be possible for many of our students to go through their academic program without being exposed to a Black faculty member at all. Now, what I'm just focusing on the benefits of a diverse faculty and the student body in this particular presentation. In some of my writings on social equity and social justice, I trace why society should be concerned with this topic, starting off with the moral reasons through the legal ones. My colleague, Susan Gooden, talks about legal and political reasons. And then I come back to talk about the impact of social equity and diversity on cognitive development and society as a whole. I always use this quote by Robert Kennedy in 1966. We must recognize as for a moral reason, the first human equality of all people before God. We must do this not because it is economically advantageous, although it is, which I will talk about in a minute, not because the laws of God commanded, although they do, not because people in other lands wish it so. We must do it for the single and fundamental reasons that it's the right thing to do. Our good colleague in public administration, George Frederickson, back in 1971, talked about the fact that equality in the delivery of public service, which talks about equality in education as well, should be one of the standards by which the goodness of a service is judged. And anytime we vary from equality, everybody getting the same thing, it should be in the direction of providing more and better services to those in lower social, economic, and political circumstances. Very recently, at one of our social equity conferences at the Baruch School in City University of New York, I was introduced to the Institute of State and Local Government at the City University of New York, their work, their equity indicators, and you'll see that this definition of equity says everyone has the same economic, education, health, housing, justice, and service outcomes, regardless of their identity group. So these are some of the moral reasons. But let's talk about some of the economic. We know that college education workers face lower unemployment and obtain higher wages than their less educated counterparts. If every state had increased its bachelor's degree attainment growth rate by just 1% over the last decade, then nationwide economic growth would have increased by $138 billion as of 2019. Now, another economic reasons, and this is particularly important for those of us in academic communities where we're losing programs, we're having shutdowns of some private universities, et cetera. We have now 1 million fewer students enrolled in college than before the COVID-19 panic began. And as you can see, the National Public Radio reported on a drop of nearly 500,000 undergraduate students in the fall of 2021. So convince your faculty colleagues and your department chairs that if they want to keep their job, they need to increase the number of underrepresented students in their programs. For example, as you can see, Black and Hispanic and Native Hawaiian students enrollment rates dropped by 15% each at the 2-year college level and 1 to 2% at the 4-year college level. Another economic reason is that closing the earning gap between white minority income would improve U.S. earnings by 12%, increasing GDP by 1.9 and generating over 2.9 billion in additional tax revenues. So for those people who are not convinced that we need diversity in academia, for moral reasons, then I would suggest you might be able to convince them from these economic reasons. Student diversity. Some attributes of student diversity. These are some of the categories. Some of the ones that I have added here would be things like military experience, diversity in cognitive and learning styles. I have done some research in that area and have come up with some fairly interesting findings of the different learning styles of students in our university. Even though this is somewhat dated, I found it interesting data. Only 20% back in 2013, only 20% of Hispanic adults have a post-secondary degree compared to 30%, 36% of all adults. 33% of LGBTQ students have seriously considered leaving college due to issues surrounding their sexual orientation. 77% of adults who comes from families in the top 25 in income gets a bachelor's degree by the time they turn 24. But in the lower income bracket, only 9% earn their bachelor's degree by the time they turn 34. Organizational performance benefits to students of having diversity of student body is learning and growing, working with all kinds of people. And I emphasize this, I do a lot of site visits for our accreditation, and even minority serving institutions, particularly HCBUs, I encourage them to diversify their faculty because they need to bring in a majority populations as well as serving underrepresented minorities. It also can lead to, with the right types of inclusion, changing the student's mind. Again, socializing and interacting with those of a different race has a positive personal and academic influence on students, leads to improved academic performance, increased cultural awareness, satisfaction with the college experience, and desires to promote racial acceptance. Diversity doesn't just have to refer to different races, but other groups, lifestyles, and cultures as well. But not all diversity, the research is mixed as to whether diversity actually leads to higher educational performance. In some studies, diverse groups have been shown to outperform homogeneous groups. In contrast, other studies have demonstrated that homogeneous groups, the process lost in homogeneous groups with poor communication patterns and excessive conflict plague diverse groups. And some studies show no relationships between diversity and organizational, increased organizational performance. And in my classes, I try to talk about some reasons for this, ending up with different levels of inclusion, some definitions of inclusion. There's a lot of talk about inclusion now and a lot of literature out. One definition, an individual's collective judgment or perception of belonging as accepted, welcome, and valued member. Inclusion that consists of the degree to which individuals feel part of critical organizational processes. One definition that I'm using in my research is the Ferdman's presentation, the psychological sense on the part of an individual that he or she is in being included. Indeed, individuals' perception of the extent of these 9 dimensions of inclusion. They feel safe, trusted, accepted, respected, supported, valued, fulfilled, engaged, and authentic. The importance of inclusion, organizational members who feel valid, and this is true of students as well as faculty and staff, are more likely to be retained in an organization, how included members perceive them to be in their work group was positively associated with job performance. Now, one of the things that I'm doing in my own research is that in the summer of 2017, I was on the assessment committee of a new council at my university on inclusive excellence and equity, that we should develop an index of collective inclusion by distributing the responses of a climate survey that was done about a year earlier among 7 of Ferdman's dimension. So I developed an index of collective inclusion. The ICI is a number between 0 and 1, which higher scores represent a greater perception of inclusion. One example of the data we collected and analyzed, just looking at race and ethnicity, the index of collective inclusion of our Asian faculty was 0.79. Keep in mind, the higher the number, the more you feel included. For whites, it was 0.7. For my Black colleagues, the index of collective inclusion was 0.68. I have similar data on such identity groups as gender, age, sexual orientation, academic rank, length of employment, all of course based upon self-reporting. Possible uses of the index of collective inclusion is that by ordering the index of collective inclusion for each identity group, like I did for race and ethnicity, we can identify those groups as having the lowest percentage of inclusion. Then we can regress those 7 dimensions of each index of collective inclusion and identify which of the dimensions, being trusted, being felt that authentic, being felt that you were included, etc., we could then develop a specific strategies for enhancing the group's perception of inclusion. And I want to thank you for your time. Sorry that I ran over, but if you've got any comments, questions, or concerns, please email me. I'm still using my VCU email address. So, Professor O'Meal, thank you very much.
Thank you. There were so many amazing nuggets, and I can't wait till we get to the Q&A session today, especially with you and the data that you shared, because there were so many amazing nuggets. One thing that I took out of it was DEI impacts all students and enhances the overall learning experience. And if we don't pay attention to that, we could be missing out on opportunities. From a statistical perspective, when it comes to professors, right now in the United States, our student population is more diverse than our faculty population. And especially in tenured environments, we are seeing that white males still have overwhelmingly, I think it's more than 50% or closer to 58% are on the tenure track at universities. And then we see white female. But then when we start looking at our communities of color, we're talking about single digit. We're not even talking about 10, 15, or 20% of the population in our university settings. We're talking about 5%, sometimes 2%, and sometimes 1%. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, especially because we put so much value on college educations. We do need to make sure that the environment is overall diverse. And I want to bring up this one last point just as we close out this particular presentation. As we all continue to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, remember, there has to be some sort of action, right? So it's not just diversity, equity, inclusion, it's enhancing, it's moving towards justice, it's moving towards reconciliation. There has to be some action, but what we can't forget some of the groups that we don't typically talk about, people with disabilities and accessibility as it relates to DE&I as well. And so I wanted to just kind of put that in the discussion, and maybe Dr. Wooldridge, if we have time towards the end, we can kind of touch on that part as well, and how that could be contributing to more and better environments in the higher education system as well.
Be delighted to.
All right, thank you so much. And so as we transition, I want to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Rajade M. Berry-James. She is an elected fellow of the congressionally chartered National Academy of Public Administration and vice chair of the Standing Panel of Social Equity and Governance. At NC State University, Dr. Berry-James is chair of the faculty and a professor of public administration in the School of Public and International Affairs. She has spent more than 30 years in higher education, having served as an MPA coordinator, PhD coordinator, and director of graduate programs for small, large, and research-intensive graduate programs. She is also a consultant specializing in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as assessment and accreditation in higher education. She has Dr. Berry-James's research, teaching, and community engagement focused on the theory and practice of social equity. Her recent book, Why Research Methods Matter: Essential Skills in Decision-Making, emphasizes real-world policy-making and evidence building to support decision-making. She has published chapters in leading public management books and published her scholarly research in top journals, including Public Administration Review, Journal of Public Affairs Education, Review of Public Personnel Administration, Journal of Black Political Research, Public Performance Management Review, and others. And in closing, I just want to add that Dr. Berry-James earned her PhD in public administration from Rutgers University in Newark with a specialization in productive public management. She also holds a Master of Public Administration from Kean University, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Rider University, and a Certified Public Manager distinction from the State of New Jersey, Rutgers University. She has also completed additional certification programs in reflective teaching, leadership development and national security, and strategy and nonprofit management. Dr. Berry-James is engaged, scholarship is guided by an old Ethiopian proverb: she or he who learns teaches. So Dr. Berry-James, thank you for joining us today, and I'd like to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Neill. I hope that everyone can hear me, and I am going to attempt to share my screen. So let's see, Dr. Woolridge, as you know, is a hard act to follow. It has been my distinct honor to work with him as a fellow in the National Academy of Public Administration. In fact, he has been a good mentor and a good friend over the years. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and flip up there. I could use a thumbs up from someone to see if you can, in fact, see my screen. It says Curriculum, a Holistic Approach in Academy. Thank you so much, Dr. O'Neill and Dr. Woolridge. I appreciate you. I just want to thank you for a minute, take a minute to thank you very much for having me here, for inviting me to have a conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, and really about approaches that I take and others take in the academy. I have a short bio here, and we've already gone through that bio. The only thing that wasn't said is that I am proud to be a life member of a few organizations that have had a meaningful impact on my career. One is the American Society for Public Administration, the other is the NAACP, and the third is Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I also say that I'm willing to share my slides. I have here some information about the slides and of course my acknowledgement in being invited to this presentation today. So like others, I agree that we should chat away. If you would drop your email in the chat feature and any questions that you have, we can use those as a basis of conversation and also as an opportunity to follow up with you. I'm looking forward to doing so. I want to share a little bit in one snippet, if you will, exactly what I've been trying to do. It is fair to say that I've been in the higher education community for more than 3 decades. And in that time, I have tried to work toward, focused on becoming an engaged scholar, someone who really believes in the principles of social equity, the practices of program evaluation, and the method of research. All of those times and all of those spaces, the number of universities that I worked with and worked for, I essentially have been trying to create what I consider to be the master curriculum. What is it that college students come to receive? What is it that they need? And what are the skill sets that they must have in order to have an impactful career in our society? I've gone through the practice of developing a capstone course where students get to explore problems or critical issues in public administration, as I call them. I've developed a cultural competence course where students could learn a little bit more about the knowledge and skills and abilities that they need, as well as the attitude and awareness that they must have in order to be effective in the public sector. I've also created a social equity course where scholars like Dr. Susan Gooden, who's currently dean of the Wilder School, as well as Dr. Blue Woolridge, come uh, where students can come and learn and understand really career work in this particular field. I've also taught program evaluation, really teaching people, the art and practice of research, and then of course using survey research so that barriers or boundaries don't define the work and the data and the people that we include in the studies that we do. And essentially, my own approach is really about collective and collaborative learning techniques. Really, these are active learning, whether it be problem solving or role play, case studies, or really understanding root cause analysis, particularly to make sure that we sort of get to the heart of the matter, really try and resolve in our own lifetimes what the problem is, and what the kind of interventions are. How do we resolve that problem that we all live with? Some of us learned from decades ago that the problem that we all live with was racism, but race and racism is equally a problem that we all live with and something that demands our attention. So looking forward a little bit, I want to talk about sort of just a few things. I know that we only have a little bit of time, so I'm going to look at my clock and I hope that someone says, please, we're out of time. I hope to talk about how we frame diversity policies, how we examine professional programs, how we advance equity or foster equity in the work that we do. And the other thing I'm really focused on is how we operationalize racial equity. It does seem that unlike gender equity, racial equity is something that we really haven't fully understood. And so I'm looking and committed to making sure that I work in that space. I want to share with you an article that I have that is really hot on the press. So it's forthcoming. It'll be published sometime this semester. And it's really focused on some of the early work of Dr. Susan Gooden, who maybe some of you have read her work regarding social equity or a nervous area of government. Um, this work particularly, it's a co-authored work and it has a sort of confrontational title, What the Hell is Wrong with America? The Truth About Racism and Justice for All. Most importantly in this work, we attempted to identify race and racism, particularly the way in which it has shaped our society. Also, we were looking at ways in which we could dismantle a system of oppression that really does not allow all people to benefit. And then we're thinking about really focusing on a call to action, recognizing that people need to name, blame, and claim a breakthrough approach. Isn't it true that for decades now, most of us have been living with this problem of race and racism? And so what we're looking to do in this particular piece of research is to identify the lived experiences, the differences, if you will, and make sure that we use the body of evidence that has been unmasked to move us forward. So in this sort of illustration here, naming requires us to look at how policies disproportionately impact certain groups of people, whether or not they help us advance racial equity or not in certain policy domains. We also blame or identify the root cause, right? What is the problem? What are the areas that prevent us from being able to solve these problems? And how are they exacerbated by failures or burdens, if you will? And then claiming what are the approaches that really, what are the approaches that really take us there? How do we get to the place where we will all want to be, or we say we want to be? How do we make sure that equity lives, that justice is something that doesn't elude us, and that we're all treated fairly, particularly as we exist together in our society? So what it really boils down to from an educator's point of view is the theory of change. So the theory of change in a lot of ways can be sort of crafted out based on how we attempt to solve the problem, how we attempt to narrow or close the problems, those problems that we live with, how we create an epicenter of belonging, particularly as we think about what is it that we need to know? What are the skills that are necessary? What can we do about this particular problem? What attitude do we have to have about the problem? And then are we aware that this problem exists more so for some people and not for others? And so by doing an equity assessment, by understanding that we must engage with others, and by making the principle of inclusion the most important one, I think that we might be able to move a little bit forward and go where we intend to go. And so I hope that today we could pivot a little bit and talk about, remember I said I would like to talk about framing diverse policies, examining professional programs, advancing equity, and operationalizing racial equity in particular. And so I'm just going to pivot a little bit to what I think I know. I've been looking and using techniques and approaches from this particular book by Adams, Bell, and Griffin, the teaching for diversity and social justice. And so this piece of literature, this research, this best practice, this breakthrough approach really helps to do a couple things. It helps us to identify that there are some social, political things that happen in our society really that dehumanize certain groups, that it's not just one stream of oppression, but there are multiple streams of oppression that really prevent certain groups from achieving their goals, that each one of us have an individual responsibility for making sure that we don't participate in that system of oppression that we see or are capable of seeing. And then we have to recognize that there are consequences in a more oppressive society. And so the way we think proactively about alternative solutions is really important. This book, among a lot of other books, has probably helped me rethink about the ways and approaches, the pedagogy that I use in order to make diversity happen and make diversity worthwhile, make diversity a lifelong goal, and make diversity a credible approach to really creating inclusive environments where we all belong. I wanted to share with you sort of some early, and I guess it's really not early anymore, but some early indicators of the change that we're likely to see. And so the United States population, if you look at the first three columns, you'll see that you see some levels of diversity, particularly in what is typically called the racial ethnic minority groups. But as we start to look at, for those same time periods, people who are under the age of 16, the youth, as I like to call them these days, we notice that over time we are becoming, our youthful population is becoming more diverse. That's a really good thing for those of us who celebrate how we leverage our understanding about racial equity. Particularly, we're thinking about, so how do we attract the best and brightest to our campuses? What are the kinds of disciplines are they interested in? What are their career aspirations? And how how do we create campus environments to make sure that they will come, they will stay, they will graduate, and they will commit to a lifelong learning journey. And so one of the exceptional agencies from my point of view that really focuses in on how we leverage talent and what are those key behaviors that we really need to underscore is the National Institutes of Health. You know, the National Institutes of Health is particularly important as we are interacting with each other virtually in a high flex environment or face-to-face, dare I say, during a pandemic. But the truth of the matter is that this particular agency really focuses on how we lead and manage an inclusive workplace to maximize the potential of every person who engages, who seeks the service, who commits to working there. And so not only are individual differences supported, but respect for all is supported, knowledge of cultural differences supported, collective working relationships supported, managing diversity or the act of managing diversity is supported, the act of valuing diversity is supported, the ability to foster inclusion also supported, and helping others, another key behavior, basically to leverage talent.
And as what happens with virtual events, sometimes technology does what technology is going to do. And I always say we need to have a contingency plan, which we do. So while Dr. Barry James is either rebooting or navigating the Wi-Fi side on her side, I just want to highlight, if we can, some of the things that she's already talked about. One of which, where she really just kind of shifted away from that, was really talking about the policies that are needed around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why that's really, really very important to moving the process forward. One of the other things that she talked about, and I jotted it down, was the book that she referenced, Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice. I think one of the things when we're looking at initiating activities and policies and rules around what does DEI look like within our own institutions and organizations, a lot of times we sit down, and a lot of organizations sit down and we think about it from a common sense perspective, and we're not really paying attention to data, number one, overall data, but then really looking at the data that is important to our individual work environments, and understanding that, you know, DEI as a topic in whatever environment we're in, it's not monolithic, and that we have to make sure we're paying attention to the ebbs and flows within our own organizations. Where are some of our more challenging areas? What has worked for one institution is not necessarily going to work for our institution, and how we navigate through that. And also spilling back to Dr. Wooldridge's conversation a little bit earlier, I think this could be a great opportunity to bring up one of those points as well. And one of those points, one of those areas that he talked about, which I am a huge fan of, Dr. Wooldridge, you talked about the PhD project. And I have a number of friends that have gone through the project and the importance of it. And sometimes we don't realize, you know, that to me was an act of, before we were really concentrating on DEI as a term, but the PhD project was a DEI initiative. And looking at the data, can you share a little bit about your experiences from understanding the PhD project and what that has the ability to do if we really mobilize behind it to higher education when it comes to our full-time faculty members specifically?
Well, I think one of the advantages of the PhD project is that it is associated with business schools and management, et cetera. And I say that because I've got the belief that in our universities, there are certain academic units that are viewed more highly than others. And things like business schools, engineering schools, obviously, if you have a medical school, well, then that's viewed very highly. And of course, those of us in the social sciences are viewed as being a communist, pinko, left-wing, social justice, bleeding hearts. And And so I very much applaud what the PhD projects, and there's chapters on many campuses, have done to promote, and they also could get money. I mean, Bernie went out in the corporations and brought money in to promote the programs, and they have quadrupled the number of underrepresented, mainly Black, faculty in business schools over the 25 years that they have been in existence. Now, when Bernie looked at the percentage of minority faculty in public administration programs, and I talked to him on the telephone, he indicated that he was somewhat embarrassed because we still have a higher number of underrepresented minorities in PA programs in the business schools, but they certainly have made more progress in the business schools. So I strongly encourage you on your individual campuses to go over to the business faculty. They're nice people, some of them, and find out what they're doing and exchange ideas, etc. We need allies. And if business schools can be concerned about the diversity of their faculty, well, then certainly those of us in the social sciences can be concerned as well.
I see that Dr. Barry James is back. So as we allow some time for her to bring her slides back up, I have one last question that we can kind of end on. One of the other things that you talked about were the hiring and the recruitment committees at the university level. And I had made a note on that there's an importance to retrain the hiring committees. Hiring committees, for those of you that do not know, are made up of faculty. And I had made up a note that retraining hiring committees was going to be really critical as we move to for using DEI as a tool of action in higher education, because what we often see, at least in my experiences, is that we find that HR really trains the faculty on rubrics, so looking at backgrounds and experiences. But the one thing that I felt that has been missing in the environments that I've been in is that we're not often paying attention to culture. We're not paying attention to what our current needs are. We're not talking about representation within higher education. So are there any recommendations from your perspective on how we can see DEI organically included into the recruitment process at the higher education level?
One of the things that one of the university diversity committees that I was on at one point of time, we got together and submitted it to the provost, who accepted it, a statement that indicated that as boilerplate in our job ads, we couldn't say that because of laws, we couldn't say that, we particularly want to hire underrepresented faculty or women or members of the LGBT community, et cetera. But we did say, and for a long period of time, it was included in our job ads, that one of the boilerplate, meaning in every job ad, along with the appropriate terminal degree, et cetera, is experience or the potential of being able to deal effectively with diverse communities. And so that was one of the criteria that our search committees had to use. Now, one of the things that I've been focusing on lately, because I'm into strategic planning and all this kind of stuff, in public administration, about 68% of our 300 academic programs have identified equity and diversity and inclusion as one of the public sector values in their strategic plan or in their mission statement. I think, and many universities, of course, my university does as well, has some kind of statement. Whether most of the people know that the statement's there or not, I think we need to use those statements in our mission statements and in our strategic plan as leverages to make sure that our search committees, our department chairs, our deans, and so on, we can always say, well, gee whiz, our mission statement says that we value these things. So obviously, we want to make sure that we are taking them into consideration when we're doing our hiring and recruitment and our promotion and tenure. So don't neglect the power of the mission statement.
Dr. Hinojosa, I would like to go on and introduce you. And because I think that this is another valuable piece of the conversation. So before I do, I have the honor of introducing Dr. Michael Hinojosa, who has served over 26 years as the superintendent and CEO of 6 public education systems, including 2 of the 25 largest school systems in America, Dallas ISD right here in Texas, and the Cobb County School District in suburban Atlanta, Georgia. His career in public education, from teacher and coach to superintendent and CEO, spans more than 4 decades. With a firm belief that education and not environment is the key to a student's success, he has led several school districts to improve student achievement. Dr. Hinojosa's recognitions include being named 2002 Superintendent of the Year by the Texas Association of School Boards and 2005 Superintendent of the Year by the University of Texas at Austin. He was honored as Distinguished Alumnus by the College of Education as Texas Tech University, and as the Outstanding Latino Educator by the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents in 2014. In 2009, D Magazine named Dr. Hinojosa the best public official in Dallas. The Council of the Great City Schools recently awarded him the Green Garner Award, the highest honor in urban education, as the 2020 Urban Educator of the Year. Dr. Hinojosa is also a past president of the Texas Association of School Administrators. He is a proud graduate of Dallas ISD, holds a doctorate in education from the University of Texas at Austin. He and his wife, Kitty, have 2 sons, graduates of Princeton University and Harvard University. And he has a son from a previous marriage who graduated from Texas Tech University. All 3 attended Dallas ISD for a significant portion of their K-12 careers. Talk about legacy, that is legacy. Dr. Hinojosa, it is truly an honor to introduce you, and I will turn the floor over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for having me. This has been a great panel. I'm not going to have a PowerPoint, but I will just talk you through some of the things that we have done. And thank you for reading my bio. Ever since my mom passed away a few years ago, no one's ever said anything nice about me. So thank you for at least acknowledging some of the work we've done. This is a very important topic. But we're practitioners in the school district, and we've taken a little different approach. We don't read about it. We don't talk about it. We do it. And then we have to call it out. So let me tell you what it is. First of all, my board is the Mod Squad, 3 black, 3 white, and 3 brown. But they violently are in 100% agreement on a board policy that the board passed. And we called it out. We called it racial equity, because that is what we're dealing with in our school system. Not only did they pass a policy, and the policy is very specific, we also created an office of racial equity, and then it is led by my chief of staff, Dr. Pamela Lear, and it's under her supervision, and we have a deputy chief of racial equity, Dr. Sharon Great, who has also done an outstanding job in putting our system together. But this reminds me of the thing that I run into a lot. In my world, sometimes someone wants to be principal, but they don't want to do principal. I know a lot of superintendents that want to be superintendent, but they don't want to do superintendent. I bet you've met a lot of chancellors who want to be chancellor, but they don't want to do chancellor. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. This is a very difficult issue to talk about for some people, but not me. I'm an immigrant and I grew up in Oak Cliff. So to me, this is very near and dear to my heart. But as we started this journey, people were very uncomfortable. And by the way, we started it way before diversity equity, and inclusion became popular in the business world. My board recognized this way before the Black Lives Matter situation occurred and things just spiraled out of control. I had to have a strategy just to have people acknowledge this. And once we showed a PBS video about redlining, did people finally say, oh, and this was done by the government, the federal government, the state government, the local governments, how we destroyed neighborhoods and split people up? Once people saw the video, now many people wanted to at least have a conversation about it as we started our journey. Another thing that we do in Dallas, we call it out. We never apologize for our demographics. We have 94% ethnic minority students. By the way, our educator workforce is about a third. We have 72% Latino. We have 21% African American. We have 86% economically disadvantaged. And we have 48% English learners. We have more English learners than El Paso ISD has students, than San Antonio ISD has students. So if you don't call it out, then you can't take action. And that's what one of the speakers was talking about. You got to do more. You got to then talk about it, then you take action. And just to make sure that we're true to our word, the board appointed a committee, a board-appointed committee, and they had a representative of smart people on this committee where we have to take some of our initiatives. Let me also talk about it. We have goal progress measures. We identify goals. On my evaluation is how African-American students do in reading, because that is our lowest performing student group. And I'm held accountable for how much we move the needle for African-Americans. Let me also mention to you that if everything is important, nothing is important. So we have very few what we call strategic initiatives. A strategic initiative is something that is very focused for us. It also costs more money. You can't have equity if you don't move your resources around. And so I'm going to describe some things that helped us get focused. And we also do quarterly reports to the board about these 6 pillars that I'm going to talk to you about where we are focused on. And these are equitable academic outcomes in instructional equity, making sure we have the right kind of instruction of expectations for all students. Programmatic equity, are the right students, are all students have access to the high rigorous, talented, gifted programs and everything else that we have? Do we have equity in leadership and operations? Do we ignore schools that are old and decrepit? Or do we do something about having the right kinds of principals and also the right kind of facilities? Or do we have a culturally competent, diverse workforce? The state passed a law so that we couldn't talk about this. The board, we were going to have a 3-year project to train all 22,000 employees about cultural competence. And then we had to accelerate it. The board said, hurry up and do it. The state legislature is wreaking havoc. They've come up with this manufactured crisis that they call critical race theory. And then also what's in your books about this, that is being driven in a very politically hostile way. It is a playbook that is running itself out through certain states, not all states, but it's impacting us. So the board charged me and my team to get the training, and the board went through the training, my senior team went through, and all 22,000 employees, and we got it all done in the year because we didn't want to be on the edge of this law. As you know, I've challenged the state and whenever I thought something wasn't right, but you know, we got this done before that law went into effect. We also have internal and external community engagement, and then we also have facility and location equity. The community passed a bond election for $3.5 billion. One of the things that's very exciting are these student and family resource centers that we're going to have in 4 neighborhoods. We're going to put $10 million in each neighborhood. We have $40 million to help overcome some of these effects of redlining. And so it's going to be different in the Pinkston community. It's going to be different in the Lincoln community. It's going to be different in Pleasant Grove. So we have West Dallas, we have South Dallas, we have part of Oak Cliff, and we have Pleasant Grove. Some places, they just need someone where you can have pro bono legal services for a family that's about to get evicted. Other places, they may have no access to healthcare. Other places, we may have food or technology deserts. So we are, depending on what those communities want, that's what we're going to put in one of our buildings to provide support to our families who are in there. And so we took a risk and we had to tie it, but the community overwhelmingly agreed to pass that. We also saw that we had a great disparity when the pandemic hit. We had 36,000 households that did not have access to broadband. If you didn't have access to broadband, number one, you couldn't learn because there was no instruction going on in person. Number two, you had no access to healthcare. Who went to the doctor during the pandemic 1.0? And number three, if you needed a job, nobody was taking applications. How can you get a job if you can't even apply for a job? So we started on our own Operation Connectivity. And I had no influence. We had no influence over the city and the county, but they joined us in a heartbeat. So did AT&T. And then we put $25 million for Operation Connectivity in the bond program that was passed in 2020. But then just by the skin of the election, a Senate election in Georgia, where I served for 3 years, they were able then to pass some federal dollars under the new administration that allowed us to then move some of those resources, because now we got money from the feds for that. By the way, the governor, who I've had disputes with, appointed me as the co-chair of the Operation Connectivity for the state of Texas, along with the Commissioner of Education. So we've moved the needle on that. Now what we're doing, we're putting up cell towers at Lincoln, at Roosevelt, at South Oak Cliff, so that we make sure that these families have access to broadband. So then, now let me talk about something else, that all of these initiatives are important, but people believe what you do, not what you say. So let me just talk about a few programs that are nothing but racial equity that were done way before this new wave. When I was superintendent in Dallas in 2013, in 2005, I was shocked. We had 1,300 classrooms that did not have a bilingual teacher. So we were in violation of the state requirements. And so we had to go to Puerto Rico, to Mexico, to Spain to train teachers. Now we're training our own kids in West Dallas and Oak Cliff and in Pleasant Grove to be teachers in our P-TECH program that I'm going to talk about more in a moment. And so now we have the best dual language in the country. In dual language, we have two programs. One is called one-way dual language. It's where monolingual Spanish speakers become biliterate. We don't want them to lose their native language. We want them to be biliterate in two languages. But also, if you're white, if you're African-American, or you're third and second generation Latino and you can't speak Spanish and you want to be biliterate, we have beautiful schools where we have white kids and black kids that are speaking, writing, and reading and taking their state exams in two languages. And we're the highest performing district in the country for English learners. I'm sad that we're not there for African-American students, but at least with this other population, because when you acquire a second language, it makes you smarter. And that's why we're very proud of that. Early learning. We invested a lot, and especially we provided scholarships in the African-American community for students who did not qualify that wanted to start in our programs. We educate all 3-year-olds half day and all 4-year-olds full day. We have overwhelming evidence that if you went to our pre-K program, by the time you got to 3rd grade, you're 2 grade levels ahead of people that did not go to program. I went to a conference on racial equity, and we had people that were yelling and screaming about, how people were being treated. And then we had an African-American presenter who said he was an MIT trained economist, and he's now a professor for Harvard. Dr. Ron Ferguson put up on a slide. And what he said on the slide, if you wait till 3 years old, it may be too late, because the brain develops when you're very young, your creativity. So now in Dallas, we started Project Legacy 2050. Well, we're not going to be the providers, but we're going to be the conveners. And the reason my boys went to Harvard and Princeton is because my wife was reading to them before they were born. My son, who went to Texas Tech, he has a higher IQ than my other 2 boys but I was a 21-year-old dad. I didn't know what I was doing. And at least he had two loving parents who got divorced. A lot of our kids don't have that. And they don't have people reading to them at home. If you want to solve racial equity, you got to go way back there. We also, the nickname for that is Project Legacy 2050. And I'll be 95 years old in 2050. So I don't think I'll be around to see that. But it doesn't matter. It's not about you. It's about the people you serve. And so we put that in place. The ACE program. What is ACE? Accelerating Campus Excellence. What we did when I first got here, we had 43 schools that were failing schools that were called F schools at that time, unacceptable performance. We got all but 4 of them off the list. And how did we do it? We put the best teachers, and we knew who the best teachers are. We paid them the most money, and we put them in those schools. We incentivized the behavior that we wanted. What we were doing before, we'd get brand new baby teachers who were learning the art and science of teaching and put them in these tough schools, and they'd quit after a year. And we kept churning. So we had a great principal and a great staff. And in 1 year, we got those schools out of triage. And in fact, we have a couple of schools that went from F to A or B. Same kids, same neighborhoods, same parents, and you bring talent to them and look what they can do. Gives me chills. Then, I'm embarrassed to tell you that in 2007, 2009, when I was superintendent, we only had 7% of our kids get any kind of post-secondary credential 6 years after graduating from high school. Today, in a pandemic, thanks to Dallas College, we now have 10% of our kids in a pandemic graduate from high school while they're graduating from community college. We have 900 kids this year. And what we did is we took this, in Dallas, we believe in the IRS, incubate, replicate, and scale. We incubated with early college with Dallas College. And then we replicated early college as a school within a school model. And now we've gone to scale in the whole district. And so every year going forward for the foreseeable future, we're going to have 1,100 kids graduating with an associate's degree while they're leaving high school. Now in Dallas, we have high expectations. And we know that if you're in advanced placement or international baccalaureate, you go into college in spite of us. But someone read the stats a while ago. Only 30% of Americans actually have a bachelor's degree. Now with Dallas College help, and of course UNT is now helping us, because what we found out about P-TECH, once you have credit in escrow, now you can see a bachelor's degree. And then they're going to see a professional degree. And Dallas College's, UNT Dallas is helping us finish this journey for a lot of these kids. And so with their help, we created a second quarter. But also the only criticism we got about P-TECH was the rest of the kids, what about us? We didn't get in. So in Dallas now, with the same bond election, we're building 4 career institutes. And so what is a career institute? This is where you can get you don't need a college degree, but you may need a few hours, but you need industry refereed certificates that say you know how to do this. And so we have 150 partners that are helping train our kids with all these things. If you're a freshman in Dallas ISD and you're not probably going to college, you have to take either principles of construction or principles of technology. Then we put you in the cybersecurity path. We put you in the aviation path. We have 2 schools right now that are teaching our kids how to be pilots. And one is being taught by a Latino who used to be in the drone industry and went to Townview High School. And the second one is being taught by a 52-year-old African-American man who was the flight instructor for Delta Airlines. Then then mechatronics, manufacturing. We have dual language HVAC, teaching these kids these skills so they can be successful. And so we think that we're going to be very successful with that. We've also opened up public school choice. If you don't like the school you're in, we want you to pick your neighborhood school. But if you don't like it, you don't have to depend on going to a charter school, homeschool, or no school, or a magnet school, because we have public school choice. The parents can vote with their feet, and we will transport them wherever they want to go. And we have a school with Paul Quinn, International Baccalaureate School, where Michael Sorrells has just promised every 7th and 8th grader that's in that school automatic admission to HBCU. We have a school with SMU and Toyota, a STEM school in West Dallas. We have a school on the campus of UT Southwestern It's going to be a biomedical school. We have a school with Apple that's a hybrid school where it's 2 days virtual and 3 days, 3 days virtual and 2 days in person. We're going to have an international school at Valley View with the North Dallas Chamber and Texas A&M Commerce. We have Downtown Dallas Inc., a Montessori school. You can now go to school in downtown Dallas and never leave. You can get your profession. You can go from pre-K all the way to college and never leave downtown Dallas. So the results that we've seen have been significant. We are still lagging in the performance of our African-American students, but our African-American students have out-improved the state. And by the way, we have generational poverty in Dallas. We always get mad at the white folks because, yeah, when we integrated, they were the first ones to leave. But they were followed shortly by the white middle class left, and I was a kid then. In 1971, there were no suburbs. I was a student in Dallas when the federal government forced us to integrate after Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. It took that long for lawsuits to prevail. And then we lost the Black middle class. They went to the suburbs. And then we lost Latino middle class. Now, all that was left was us. Like Richard Pryor says, just us, students of poverty, me. So, but now we don't make excuses. Like I said, we don't apologize for our demographics. And we take this matter very seriously. But we also, I had to fire one consultant because this consultant and got up and made everybody line everybody up by their level of whiteness. We cannot guilt people into doing the right thing. We need to inspire them. We need to support them. We need to make sure they do the right thing. And so you do things, command decisions are easy to make and hard to implement. Consensus decisions are messy. It takes a long time, but implementation is much faster and deeper because people believe in it. And I'll close with 3 things: the past, the present, and the future. The past, I'm excited about. I'm proud of my past. I'm proud to be a Latino. I'm proud to be an immigrant. I'm proud to be from Oak Cliff. I'm proud to have served in this community and gone in this community most of my life. And a lot of times, if you're from Oak Cliff, you were put down from you were from Oak Cliff. Thank now SOC, because of SOC, everybody wants to be part of Oak Cliff. But it's, it has to take a football team to have people believe in us. But I am very proud of my past, and you should be proud of your past because you're a set of your experiences, and never apologize for your past. In the present, though, you have to be enthusiastic. Nothing can be done in the absence of enthusiasm, in my opinion. And so, we can't, despite some of the challenges that our kids, the mental health challenges that our kids are facing, the teen pregnancy rates, if you are doom and gloom, then who wants to follow you and who's going to help you solve the problem? And then about the future, a lot of people are worried about the future with the political rancor that we have, with this engineered, manufactured crisis. And by the way, a lot of businesses have kind of backed off of their diversity situations because now the state of Texas is making so much noise. We have it. And if we have to see you in court, we'll see you in court. The legislature makes the laws. The executive branch enforces the laws, but the courts interpret the laws, whether they're constitutional or not. So sometimes you have to challenge things if you don't think they're right. Now, you may win or you may lose, but you at least have that opportunity in America. That's what makes this country great. But in the pandemic, I look to the future with hope and aspiration. I just described that in the next, what's going to happen in Dallas in the next 10 years, we're going to no longer be the tale of two cities because we're going to grow Southern Dallas organically because now these kids, American Airlines hired all minority kids, 10 of them, making $58,000 a year that went to the Adamson P-Tech that are getting, 401k and free flights all over the world. And Thomson Reuters hired 38 kids right out of high school doing professional jobs. So once these kids have a disposable income, the only place where property is cheap is Southern Dallas. Once they buy property, then now they can afford a $4 Starbucks. They're going to demand a Starbucks in Southern Dallas. I'm already starting to see it creep past North Oak Cliff where I grew up. And North Oak Cliff didn't look like Bishop Arts looks now when I was growing up. And then eventually then we can grow the city. But if we got to keep this momentum going, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'll turn it back to the facilitators.
I don't know what to say after that. I am not a native of Texas. I am a New Yorker, but I grew up in New York City Department of Education, and I get a little emotional when I hear people that are passionate about our children. I'm also a former professor on the dual credit level, teaching political science. So I know the importance of having our students not only graduate out of high school, but graduate and take advantage of these opportunities for dual credit. And it's something that we didn't see, and it wasn't always offered to all students in the same type of way. So I'm excited that the Dallas College, Dallas ISD partnership is going to continue to expand, because I think all students should be able to take advantage of that and get an opportunity to feel what higher education is like, and to also know that they are worthy of the opportunity. So I just wanted, I'm a student of hip hop. I will just say that, Dr. Inahosa, and Jay-Z has this song called Legacy. And as you were talking, all I kept saying over and over and over again was legacy, 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 because you have created this legacy for any leader to really look and take advantage and continue this roadmap. And I think that's what we need to see across education in general. What is the roadmap? And we don't need to go to the beginning to move forward again if the roadmap has gotten us to a really great point, that it's up to our leaders to evaluate what's needed right now, and to continue down the road. So I just want to thank you for that presentation and being as honest and direct and as blunt as you were during the presentation, and as always, because our kids deserve that. Our children deserve that, and our education system deserves that. So what I want to do to ensure that we are able to really anchor on these last 20 minutes that we have together, if I can have all of the presenters come back on screen, I want to kind of jump into Q&A at this particular point. And Dr. Barry James, what I want to do is actually lead with you and give you an opportunity, if there were some areas first from your presentation that really need the nuggets that need to be shared. I want to first give you about 5 minutes to just kind of share some additional content, and then we'll go into the structured Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. O'Neill. I will say that one of the things that I've learned in my 30 years or so is that we need to definitely focus on equitable practices. I think it's important for us to not run away from racial equity, not run away from, what it is that we know, what it is that we want to know, what it is that we've learned. A lot of the research in my area, and I'll share my slides. I hope you all could share with other people who attended, is that, the conflicts that we see are real conflicts, and we don't have a lot of practice in terms of how we manage diversity. There are some distributional benefits, if you will, for diversity. Some people win and some people don't win. But what we really need is to know what is the impact of the affirmative measures that we put in place. They cost us something, right? And all kids deserve the very best. I'm a poor kid. I grew up at the lowest level of poverty in our society. And yet, had it not been for education and some teachers who took a fond interest in me, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I think that as we transition from, sort of these affirmative measures to valuing diversity, how we manage diversity and what likely conflict is going to result, group conflict sometimes, is really important to focus on. I will tell you that a lot of times when I sit on those committees that Dr. Blue Woolridge talked about, the committees that are charged with selecting the next professor, right, for building the curriculum, for administering academic programs, the issue of diversity is really hard to talk about, particularly because people don't want to talk about who is responsible for diversity in the classroom, on the campus, and in the workplace. The other point is that people don't want to talk about how much it costs, right? For the Black community, we know how much the lack of diversity costs. We know that our students don't have people to go to or people to champion them or people to sponsor them. And so I know that the disconnect between our community and their community, whoever there is problematic. And so who's being held responsible for diversity? Who's being held responsible for those failures to change? And who's being held responsible for the implementation barriers that continue to exist for us, right? Is problematic. And so it's problematic in terms of how we see things. And so, yeah, that's what I came here to say today. Thanks for letting me have my say.
You're welcome. One of the points that you just hit on, and I'd like to open this up to all three of our panelists. One of the things that you mentioned was you touched on who is responsible. So if we're not getting DEI initiatives, whether we're talking about policy or we're moving to action, who is actually and who should be responsible? How do we navigate that in the education space, whether we're talking about K through 12 or we're talking about higher education, or we're talking about the combination of two? Because Dr. Woolridge, you mentioned earlier in your presentation about representation, how important that is. And there's no difference in representation in the classroom when we're talking about K through 12 as well. And so how do we hold people responsible or accountable when we don't see things happening?
Well, personally, I think it depends upon which of the levels of education we're talking about. And I've been, even though my much younger colleague, Dr. Barry James, has been an academic for 30 years, I've been one for 50 years. And one does need to locate vulnerable parts of our institution of higher education, or places where you can exert leverage. And you got to admit now, there's a lot of people in higher education that you think would be allies, including underrepresented minorities, women, faculty members, and so on, who, for many reasons, are not committed to the cause. And we need to develop allies. And I'll mention my campus. And we tried to develop other affiliation groups among the Hispanic, very small number of Hispanic faculty that we had, with the women's group. And I'm delighted to say that most of the time the Black faculty were the most active, but then also strategically utilized the students, because there's nothing without us telling them to do it. I was delighted the last time our Black students and their allies occupied the president's office. They were using some of the data on their signs that I had developed. That's a feeling of but you need to do that. You need to be able to. We're right downtown Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia. I mean, 300 feet from that building that used to be where my office was where Robert E. Lee's statue was, Monument Avenue. There's been a lot of changes in the last couple of years. I'm afraid that with recent elections and so on, we're losing the momentum. But we need to use all of our weapons, our advantages. Appropriate members of our board of directors, members of the community, faculty members, key members of the administration, our faculty colleagues. And we need to all work together, and we need to develop allies so that we will support another identity group in their struggle, with the idea that they will then come back and help us. Because, I think it was that great DEI expert, Benjamin Franklin, that says, if we don't hang together, we'll all hang separately.
That's good. Dr. Inahosa, one of the things that you mentioned that I also made note of, because you made a few comments that to me were very notable. When you were talking about the past, present, and future, you said that nothing can be done in the absence of enthusiasm. And something else you said right before that is we can't guilt people in to change. Can you share just a little bit more about when we do see from a DEI perspective, people trying to guilt people, whether it be white people or otherwise, into change? Can you tell me how that shows up? And let's just talk about with K through 12 kids. If we are guilting people into doing something different and their spirit is not there, they're just doing it because they've been guilted. How does that show up on a day-to-day basis and have a negative effect on our children?
Well, I love hip hop too, and you can't be fake. In fact, if you're fake, the kids will sniff you out, and so will the adults. So I love it when they call me Big Pop, since you like some hip hop here. But what happens? You have to be real, and I think right now we need to have a few people that are flamethrowers and bomb throwers, but also you can't just keep throwing bombs. You got to get inside the tent, and the militants don't get to be inside the tent. If you get there, you can't stay there. So you have to find a way to work with people. And I read this article in 1994 from the Harvard Business Review called by John Cotter about why transformations fail. What we're looking for is a transformation. So 2 reasons. Number one, there's not a sense of urgency. I think the sense of urgency was there. And then now it's being tamped down by this initiative, this manufactured crisis about DEI and et cetera. But then you can't just have a sense of urgency. Then you got to have a guiding coalition that will help you there. And what we need to do is talk people off the ledge. If you want people you can't force people to comply, but you can convince them to enroll. Here's the difference. Also, I learned from Peter Singh. Let's talk about the difference between discussion and definition. Discussion is, let me convince you I'm right. Dialogue is, it's not your way or my way, but a better way. Let me understand where you're coming from so you can understand me. So you develop this guiding coalition, and we got multiple people of reason, because there's also the Pareto principle. When you start something like this, 20% of the early adopters, they're the gung-ho people. They're going to do everything you want. 20% are the cave people, citizens against virtually everything, and they're going to try to kill you on it. What you need to do is enthusiastically get the middle 60%. And once that grows organically and you have a guiding coalition, then you can finally have transformation in this space. And you have to have a few agitators, but you can't agitate your way to success. You got to elect people to be in those chairs, like my school board is going to expect us to come back with reasonable solutions. And you just can't let people mistreat people along the way. Just because you did it to me, now I'm going to do it to you. That's not going to get you very far. So in my humble opinion, that's how you organize the systems for success.
Dr. Barry James, I'm going to ask my last structured question to you, and then I'm going to ask the 3 of you to end our time today with one key takeaway you hope the audience will take away from this collective conversation today. But Dr. Barry James, my question to you is, throughout the conversation, we've heard about economics. And you started talking about policy, and you shared with some other areas. Can you kind of zone in for us and the audience that's here with us live and that will watch the replay? If we don't address DEI, what's the potential from an economic perspective? How is that going to impact our communities and our country if we don't address it? What kind of negative impact or positive impact? I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm asking, what kind of negative impact are we potentially, or are we already seeing?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question about the economics of it all. I will say first, though, that I too believe in something very powerful, that the law is the language of social equity. While we do need agitators, I believe strongly that we need evaluators. We need people who are capable of understanding the impact of policies, programs, and practices on the decision making, right? How are we spending our money? What kind of impact are we having? Who is it helping? What are some of the gaps that we still haven't filled? Where do we go from here? These are the conversations that are economic in nature, because what we do see is a lot of stop out, drop out, or fail to graduate from college. Some of those people who stop out, drop out, or fail to graduate from college, they're in our community. And so in our community, what are we doing to make sure that we address their unmet needs, right? That's an evaluator's question, right? So what are we doing? How much does it cost? What impact are we making? And what are our next steps? What else do we need to do? It is true, we probably shouldn't throw money at the problem, but we certainly need to know how this economic opportunity is spent now that the window of opportunity is opened.
Wonderful. So I'm going to restate my question to everyone. What is it, one takeaway from today's conversation, the collective conversation, that you hope all of our viewers are paying attention to and take away from it? And or what is one call to action you're requesting of us that are paying attention to this today? Dr. Woolridge, we'll start with you.
You're starting with me because I'm an old man and I might forget the question by the time I get around to it. I think I very much enjoyed the dialogue. Jade and I right now are in the midst of finishing up a chapter on the impact of the pandemic on the minority community, particularly the academic community and so on. So we work together on lots of different things. I think one of the things that one takeaway that I would like to leave with everyone is that, first of all, we need what Dr. Hinojosa talked about, the enthusiasm, the commitment, the energy. And then we need to be able to use different approaches depending upon the individuals we're talking about. I like the concept of the bell-shaped curve. I used to always say that our purpose is to move the percentages in a positive direction, get more of those 60% into the early adapters in terms of social justice. And there's some people that need very little encouraging to get involved in the battle because they are already committed. And there's some people that ain't never going to, that bottom standard deviation. But that 60% in the middle, we need to hit them with what will impact them. Some of it will be moral reasons. Some of them will be economic reasons. The fact that, man, we can't afford all of the law enforcement that we need to have a safe community because of the poverty that is causing violence. And I don't mind scaring them to death either. You know, I mean, that they need to be committed to social justice because of what can happen in our community. You can't police your way out of it. And then there's other people that just plain data. We can appeal to their intellect. So all of us in this presentation can contribute to shifting that needle in a positive direction towards more social justice.
Dr. Barry James?
I will just add, you know, it's really hard to follow Dr. Blue Woolridge. I'm just going to say that just out loud. But I will say that on the ballot is really the fight for social equity and the promise that we've all talked about. I think that certainly we can see in our here and now the challenges that we're experiencing, right? The fact that once again, we are working to determine whether or not voting is in fact our fundamental right. Once again, we are challenging how much money goes into our communities, whether they are marginal or not. Once again, we are looking at the lack of housing, the lack of healthcare, the lack of education for our community, right? Despite the richness and the money that's flowing from Washington all the way down to Florida. And the truth is that, this sort of kind of undercount is a heightened concern for us. It's really something that we need to pay attention to, whether it is how many times we put our ballot in the box or how many times we report where we live and how we live and under what condition. So the responsibility really is that we need to do the right thing, right? And we need to do what's right. The truth is that many people are suffering. We all don't look alike. Many people are kept out. We all don't look alike. Many people have lost lives. We all don't look alike. Dr. Woolridge is often reminding me that COVID is the great revealer. It is just one other way in which we understand what inequity and injustice looks like.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Hinojosa.
Well, I will also close by saying that what we've learned, a reporter on Martin Luther King Day asked me at the intersection of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X when we're having the celebration about, have we realized Dr. King's dream? I said, no, not really. We've made progress, but we haven't realized the dream. And the fact that Martin Luther King believed in nonviolence that's why there's the only person who has an actual holiday named after him. Malcolm X believed in violence, and he's not, and none of us want that. But at that time, that was the only solution he saw. And so I guess just to quote Jay-Z, also, I have no patience and I hate waiting, but we got to do something. We got to keep the journey going.
Well, I don't know what to say after that, Dr. Hinojosa, because you're my people. But I want to thank the three of you. It has been an honor to sit at your feet in this virtual setting and just hear the different perspectives and, quite honestly, the overlapping perspectives. And here's my final statement before I turn it back over to Matt Houston. DEI in academia and education as a whole, if we have not gotten this one thing out of today, then we need to re-listen to this entire session. DEI in education has a long-term impact on life, the quality of life, the quality of our communities, our individual trajectories, not just what we have the potential to earn today, but what does that potential look like over our lifetime? So I thank the three of you for really sharing and pouring into us today. And I know I'm going to have to watch it over myself because there's some key information that I want to make sure that I have jotted down so I can take it into some of the projects that I'm working on. So thank you all for the time and sharing this space. And Matt, I am going to turn it over to you now. Thank you so much for having me today.
Professor Kimberly O'Neill, I want to thank you for moderating this amazing event. I want to thank our presenters. Wow. It was an amazing, intriguing 2 hours. Dr. Hinojosa, I did not know you were a hip hop head. I did not want to interject. I have plenty of quotes, but I definitely see the relevance in how being excellent in academia can still be relevant in culture. And so thank you for sharing that. Dr. Wooldridge, Dr. James, you all were amazing. Thank you for your perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion in academia. And it proved a very enhancing experience as we will use this video to educate. This forum is not to just for everyone to have a platform to speak, but this is a tool for education. That's what UNT Dallas stands for. That's what Dallas College stands for. We want to inform the community. I want to thank personally the committee, and I want to thank them by name because of all of their hard work. I want to thank the Dean of the School of Business, Dr. Karen Shumway, the Director of the Urban Search Institute, Dr. James Agbozaki, Dr. Jasmine Parker of Dallas College, as well as Deanna Flores, B. Martinez, Marisol Romani, Arthur Lumsey, who was our technical person in the back. Thank you for being able to adjust and to pivot during this time. I also want to thank our community partners. I want to thank Harrison Blair of the Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce, Rick Ortiz of the Greater Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Jared Fitzpatrick of the Dallas Regional Chamber, as those three chambers are working together to educate the community. And I would like to thank Samaje Best, our marketing director, and our graduate intern, who is a master's student in public leadership, Corey Hurd. Thank you all for being an amazing committee so that we can have this program. Please be on the lookout for our next event next Wednesday, where we will be discussing a holistic approach in DE&I in government. Please register for that. And also, do not let this discussion end here. Forward this stream. If you are a part of the Urban Search Institute, please share this with your network so that you all can have a conversation. This is a resource for the community. Thank you all very much, and you all have a great day.